Welcome to the Florida Bar Podcast, where we highlight the latest trends in law office and law practice management to help you run your law firm. Brought to you by the Florida Bar's Practice Resource Institute. You're listening to Legal Talk Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Florida Bar Podcast, brought to you by the Practice Resource Institute on Legal Talk Network. This is Christine Bilbrey, recording from the 2018 Annual Florida Bar Convention in Orlando, Florida. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to welcome a special guest. She was a keynote speaker for us yesterday, and well-known speaker and author, Jeena Cho. She is the author of The Anxious Lawyer, and you may recognize her name. She did a lot of work for us for the Young Lawyers Division. So welcome, Jeena.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell our listeners that may not be aware of your work a little bit about yourself and how you got into this.
Sure. So I am a bankruptcy lawyer from San Francisco, and I practice with my husband. And I started practicing mindfulness and meditation because I was struggling with overwhelming anxiety. And I didn't even know that that's really what was happening, was overwhelming anxiety. I actually became very alarmed when I started losing clumps of hair. And I went to a doctor. He ran every test, and he said, Jeena, there's nothing physically wrong with you. And a friend of mine at the time, who's a psychotherapist, said, Jeena, I think you might have an anxiety disorder. And I said, no, I don't. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers don't get anxiety disorders. But I was eventually diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. And one of the treatment protocol was to learn how to practice mindfulness and meditation. So that's how I got into it.
Excellent. And unfortunately, we've seen all the statistics from the studies that have come out. So in this regard, you are not special. So many attorneys are struggling with depression and anxiety, and it's affecting their work. It's affecting their lives. So for those who are very skeptical, they don't like crunchy granola solutions to their problems, what do you say to them?
Yeah, so when I talk about mindfulness and meditation, really what I'm talking about is training your mind for optimal performance. And I know that for a lot of lawyers, they think, oh, meditation, it's something that those meditation gurus do, but it's not for me. But if you think about it, your mind is your most important tool that you use as a lawyer. And so, of course, you would train it. If you're an athlete, you would train your body for optimal performance. So we can do the same thing with our mind.
So yesterday when you spoke, and I believe it was at the judicial reception, you were the keynote speaker, what were the most important points that you hope that audience took away after hearing you?
Yeah, so I basically had three different call to action. One was, we know statistically speaking, somewhere from 30 to 40% of that room are struggling with chronic stress, chronic anxiety, depression, substance or alcohol abuse. So, I think one of the most vulnerable and courageous thing we can do as lawyers is to say, hey, I need help. I thought that I did not want to get help. I didn't think that I had a problem. And I thought if I say that I have a problem, I would be perceived as being weak or ineffective as lawyers. But I think, we can't get well until we are willing to say, hey, I need help. And there's no shame in that. The studies suggest that people with anxiety disorder, which, by the way, is one of the most treatable mental health issues out there, it takes about 5 to 10 years before they get help. And the same was true for me. It probably took at least 5-7 years before I was willing to say, I need help. And I think that's really unfortunate because I know that there are other lawyers out there, probably lawyers in that room, that are struggling, that are suffering, that are just trying to hold it all together. But it doesn't have to be that way, And this journey can be made so much easier by just reaching out. So that was my first call to action. And the second one was to reach out to colleagues that we suspect are having trouble. So my friend who's a therapist, she was very persistent in saying, hey, you should get help. And I did not grab her hand as she was extending it out to me for a long time. And, don't be surprised if you reach out to a colleague and you say, hey, what can I do to help? I see that you're struggling. They may be like, I'm not struggling. They may be in deep denial. So that's also part of the equation. And third is to, practice that ongoing self-care, so putting yourself first, recognizing that we can't pour from an empty vessel and that practicing self-care does not make you selfish. So those were sort of my three big takeaways from the talk.
And I think you have a lot of credibility because you are a fellow attorney. And so every time an attorney finally says, I got help and I'm doing really well, it destigmatizes it.
Right.
You're probably reaching someone who was in that 5 to 7 year period of wasted time. And if you're billing by the hour, that's a lot of wasted hours in those years.
Yeah.
But I love your analogy of training your brain. So can you give us a little sample? And I do want to say, if you're driving, keep your eyes open. But if somebody wants to just, because if they've had no contact with this, I think that's scary to take the first step. So can you show us how simple it is?
Sure. So we can just do a 2-minute practice right now.
Okay.
And again, for those people that are driving, don't do this while driving, come back another time. So first, when we meditate, we want to actually set up our posture. So, so often we are hunched over and we're working on our computer. So actually rolling the shoulders back and opening up the chest area. And then once you feel settled, allowing the eyes to close. And we're going to start this practice by taking 3 deep breaths. So breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. And one more, breathing in and breathing out. And now allowing your breath to return back to normal. And so when we meditate, we use the breath, which is constantly with us. You can't leave home without it, as an anchor so that we can pay attention to what is happening in this moment. So taking the next few moments just to be with the breath. There's no need to change how you're breathing in any way. The body knows how to breathe. And just giving yourself this moment to practice the art of non-doing and non-striving. And now let's close the practice by beginning to wiggle the fingers and toes and moving your body in any way that feels good to you. And when you feel ready, allow the eyes to open.
So if you just followed along with Jeena, you should feel refreshed, as I do. It's better than a second cup of coffee. It's funny because I think people are so resistant to it, and attorneys, because I bet while they were trying to do it, they were thinking about their cases and it was floating into their head. So what do you tell people that are working with you who say, I can't shut my brain off to do this?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest misnomer when it comes to meditation. Your mind will do its thing. Mm-hmm. It will continue to think. It will continue to daydream, worry, make your to-do list, make your grocery list, so on and so forth. And that's part of the practice, right? We actually want to get to know our mind as it is. So when it becomes distracted, when you're sitting with your client, but your mind is going through your to-do list, often we don't even recognize that the mind is doing that. Mm-hmm. So the more familiar we can become with our habitual patterns, the more we actually have a choice of doing something different. So mindfulness is often talked about as the ability to add a moment of pause between the stimulus and the reaction, which then becomes a response.
And I think that it makes you a better listener, because if you are doing that, you are being fully present for your clients and for your family. And I think that's a gift, especially for mental health. I think people really, really need to be listened to. So you're doing something good for yourself, And you're doing something good for the person that's with you in that moment. I think that's a wonderful thing. And if you're doing that several times a day, everyone's going to benefit from that. Very important. Thank you for taking us through that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if our listeners want to find out more about the work that you're doing, how can they reach you?
They can go to my website. It's jeenacho.com. That's JEENACHO.com.
Excellent. And is your book available on Amazon?
Yes, it's available on Amazon and also at the ABA bookstore.
And give us the whole title.
It's The Anxious Lawyer, an 8-week guide to a more joyful and satisfying law practice through mindfulness and meditation.
Excellent. So if you want to be more joyful or you just want to train your brain so that you become even more of a super lawyer, I highly recommend this. So this has been another edition of the Florida Bar Podcast, brought to you by the Practice Resource Institute on Legal Talk Network. Thank you to Jeena Cho for joining us. If you like what you heard today, please find us and rate us in iTunes. I'm Christine Bilbrey. Until next time, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Florida Bar Podcast, brought to you by the Florida Bar's Practice Resource Institute and produced by the broadcast professionals at Legal Talk Network. If you'd like more information about today's show, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com, subscribe via iTunes and RSS. Find the Florida Bar, the Florida Bar Practice Resource Institute, and Legal Talk Network on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Or download the free app from Legal Talk Network in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.